Warning: this video spoils the plot of the game Subnautica in order to illustrate how it functions as a pro-environmental narrative. If you have not played the game and would like to in the future, it is recommended you watch something else, as this will strip much of the mystery of the game away. Proceed at your own risk. In 1796, during a lecture, the famed scientist George Cuvier first suggested that a species could disappear entirely from the world, going extinct. He had been studying the fossils of mammoths near Paris that clearly were not the bones of living elephants, making him wonder about the possibility of a species vanishing forever. A few decades later, he would examine massive antlers found in an Irish bog and determined they did not belong to a modern moose as had initially been believed, but an enormous deer that clearly did not exist today, as it's not like it could just hide behind a tree. It was, in fact, extinct. Not long after that, large bones long held as the remains of giants were identified as belonging to massive prehistoric reptiles that also clearly did not exist in the world today. In 1826, Mary Shelley would explore the idea of human extinction as a result of a pandemic in The Last Man, which, along with Shelley's earlier Frankenstein, were critical for the development of the modern science fiction genre. Over the coming decades, as the public's imagination was captured by fossils of prehistoric creatures in museums, they began to work their way into works of science fiction. In 1864, Jules Verne would publish Journey to the Center of the Earth, where a three-man team travels through a lava tube system into a vast chamber deep below the Earth's surface that acts as a refugia for various groups of extinct flora and fauna, from lycopods to mastodons to plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs battling in a subterranean ocean. A year later, Charles Dodgson, better known under the pen name Lewis Carroll, who enjoyed going on trips to the Oxford Museum to see the remains of the dodo with a daughter of a family he was close with, included the bird in the 1865 book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The book was such a big hit, it propelled the dodo to become a symbol of extinction. Extinct animals would continue to make appearances in literature, one of the most famous examples being 1912's The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in which a British scientific expedition encountered prehistoric fauna on the top of a tempe in the remote wilds of South America. Over the 19th century, the average person went from being unable to imagine a species going extinct to being obsessed with the bones of long-gone creatures. And thanks to the dodo, as well as some high-profile extinctions during the 19th and early 20th century, like the great auk and passenger pigeon, humans learned that they could be responsible for the extinction of a species. And as the passenger pigeon had once been the most numerous bird in the world, we learned that any species could be driven to extinction by the action of man. The world would soon be gripped by several decades of war and strife, and people would witness true atrocities that humans committed against each other. Film was beginning to take off as a narrative art form, and though films like 1933's King Kong, 1953's Beast from 2,000 Fathoms, and 1954's Godzilla continued the tradition of prehistoric creatures surviving into the modern age, they have a more cynical view of humanity, where the actions of man bring these creatures into our modern world and they wreak havoc. In the latter two examples, the testing of nuclear weapons awakens sea monsters, which then go and attack nearby cities, and so are in a way an allegory to the destruction caused by 20th century weapons of mass destruction. Soon, though, exploring the idea of extinction would leave Earth and be taken into the stars. In 1966, the first episode of Star Trek aired to the public, The Man Trap. In this episode, the crew of the Enterprise encounter a fearsome salt-sucking, shape-shifting alien that is the last of their kind, that despite having to be killed when it attacks Captain Kirk, Kirk shows a degree of sadness at the death, sympathetically comparing the creature to the American bison, which had nearly been hunted to extinction in the 19th century, and still are nowhere near as numerous as they once were. As the modern environmental movement began to take off, extinction and environmental messages would only continue to become more apparent. In the 80s, Star Trek would make a whole movie centered around the extinction of the humpback whale, which after excessive hunting prior to the ban on whaling had declined by some 90% worldwide, and had not yet shown the strong recovery that has brought these giants of the deep back from the brink today. We cannot really discuss environmental themes in science fiction without at least mentioning James Cameron's 2009 Avatar, though making sense of where that film stands in environmentalism and conservation really needs its own video. I also think that just a few years later, a different science fiction story that takes place on a beautiful bioluminescent world orbiting a distant star does a far better job of exploring themes of extinction and conservation.
Attention. Hull failure imminent. All personnel abandon ship.
Subnautica is an open-world survival game developed and published by Unknown Worlds Entertainment. It was developed in early access, with the earliest alpha released all the way back in 2014, with the final game released some 4 years later in 2018. In the game, you play as the survivor of the mysterious crash of the starship Aurora of the megacorporation Altera during a slingshot maneuver over an uncharted ocean planet denoted 4546b. With the aid of a personal digital assistant, you must find a way to stay alive, collecting raw materials and organisms that can be turned into more useful items that aid in your survival. However, over time these resources can become depleted. One of the most important organisms for your survival, especially in the early parts of the game, before you start farming plants, have a water filtration system, get the still suit, or figure out that you can make water out of bleach, which I never figured out, is a creature known as the bladderfish, which is one of the few ways you can get fresh water on this ocean planet. Over the course of my first playthrough of the game, these initially common fish became rarer and rarer, to the point I stopped seeing them altogether, which made me wonder if I had over-harvested them, which kinda blew my mind that the developers would include something as subtle as someone over-collecting a virtual species to the point it becomes endangered. A quick search verified that I was not alone in experiencing this lack of bladderfish. Whether an intentional feature or a really cool bug, it seems slow respawn rates on the animals make it possible to deplete fish stocks, with the bladderfish having more pressure on its population due to being the main source of water in the early game, while hunting pressure is more evenly distributed on the several food fish species. Intentional or not, this is an amazing way to show the consequences of over-harvesting a resource. Soon after the crash landing, you are alerted that the main wreckage of the Aurora is leaking radiation, and because it is full of salvage, you head towards the Aurora in a radiation suit. On your approach, the PDA determines the fallout will have major impacts on the local ecosystem if not repaired soon.
Life form readings in this region are sparse. The Aurora's radioactive fallout will have devastating effects on the alien ecosystem if not contained within the next 24 hours.
Eventually, you work your way into the drive room, where you can repair breaches in the drive's generators.
Warning, local radiation at maximum tolerable level. Containment breach repaired.
Fighting off parasitic organisms that have taken up residence in the flooded room. Ungrateful little bloodsuckers. Upon fixing all the breaches, the radiation in the area will subside over the next few days as the sea washes it away. And for your trouble, you get the achievement called Extinction Event Avoided. While not necessary to complete the game, fixing the drive core will allow you to move around the ship without a radiation suit, and this mission acts as a good warm-up for the rest of the story. While the primary mission of the Aurora was to expand the reach and power of the Altera Corporation in the galaxy, you learn that there was a secondary mission to find survivors of a Mongolian ship that disappeared a decade prior around 4546b. While exploring the map, you find the remnants of bases constructed by the crew and learn some malady befell them, with the last survivor suffering from an illness while having strange visions. In your exploration, you also begin to see fish with glowing chartreuse cysts all over their bodies. During planetfall, the Aurora was able to broadcast a SOS, and a nearby vessel was able to pick it up and come in on a rescue mission. When you head towards the designated landing site, you arrive on a mountainous island. Here, on this island, you discover something major. A massive alien structure. When the rescue vessel comes into land and pick you up, the structure comes out of standby and fires on the ship, destroying it, indicating that both the Mongolian ship and the Aurora were brought down by this alien weapon.
It's coming from the building. Change course. Set thrusters to full.
Using special alien tablets, you can enter the structure and eventually work your way into its lower levels, where the control room is. Here, you attempt to deactivate it. This does not work, and the PDA translates this message broadcast from the alien computer.
The control panel is broadcasting a message. Translation reads, "Warning, infected individuals may not disable the weapon. This planet is under quarantine."
And you learn you are infected with a strange alien disease. Following the trail of the Mongolian crew, you find their base in the depths. Here you find an orange tablet as well as a strange egg with a cute little embryo inside. The tablet opens up a small alien cache further down where you find another one of these eggs. These are the eggs of the cuttlefish, which acts as a pet in the game. The game allows you to hatch eggs in large aquariums, and many different fauna you encounter lay them. However, there are no cuttlefish swimming about the map, so the only way to interact with them is to find their eggs and hatch them yourself. This hints that these cute little mutant hybrids of a pufferfish and an octopus are extinct, with only a few eggs remaining in stasis around the map. The game also almost seems to make a reference to Star Trek: The Journey Home by talking about the extinction of dolphins in the scan data from the cuttlefish, which now makes me sad because it makes me think about the Vaquita and Paiji. Exploring deeper, you travel through a vast cave system with a brine river flowing through it. You begin having visions of something trying to communicate with you.
What are you?
Down here in these caverns, you find the remains of many ancient creatures, including this large, dragon-like skeleton near a destroyed alien laboratory. Here you discover that life on 4546b has declined dramatically in an extinction event brought about by the introduction of an alien bacterium. The ancient aliens who constructed all of these structures were on the planet searching desperately for a cure to this disease that had killed billions of individuals in their empire. They studied organisms in this facility in order to find and develop some sort of antibiotic. In the process, they took the egg of the dragon-like Leviathan outside, which pursued the aliens back to this facility and ultimately destroyed this base, which released a specimen of the bacteria into the water, forcing the aliens to enact quarantine procedures. You also discover the aliens captured a specimen of a creature that had some immunity to the disease, which they housed in another facility even deeper in the cave system. Subnautica does a really good job of building fear, letting this survival game drift into the horror genre. First off, the developers decided not to give the player any powerful weapons, only allowing you to make a small survival knife, and though there are a few different defense systems for vehicles available later, nothing is particularly lethal. This is fine when you start in the shallows where there are only small creatures and very little to fear, but venturing out, the creatures get far larger. Just outside the shallows you come across the giant reefbacks, which are gentle creatures that slowly ply through the water with entire ecosystems growing on their backs and command a sense of awe. However, their initial appearance can be a bit disconcerting. Venturing deeper, you come across your first giant predator, the Reaper Leviathan. As you explore the deeper locations along the edges of the map, or in the caverns, you come across the terrifying Ghost Leviathan. So after you descend deeper into a large volcanic chamber and hear a loud roar, you are on edge. These are the roars of the sea dragon Leviathan, because Subnautica decided to make the saying, "Here be dragons," very real. You are hopelessly outmatched by these Leviathans, so being unable to go in guns a-blazing, you sneak around and give these monsters the respect they deserve. If you ever get the chance to scan the sea dragon Leviathan, You will find the species is on the brink of extinction, with a population likely only in the single digits. And there are only 3 that can be found in these volcanic depths. This information kind of makes their once ferocious call a little forlorn and sad, and there definitely is a melancholy element to the sound design. Descending further into the heart of an active volcanic region, you have another vision leading you to one final large alien structure guarded by one last sea dragon.
I am what you seek. Want to help you.
Using a blue tablet, you enter the vast space of the Emperor Containment Facility. Here you find the aliens were close to a cure using the unique enzyme 42 the Emperor seems to produce. Behind another force field, you enter a large room with an entrance into a large aquarium, where you can come face to face with the Sea Emperor.
Are you here to play? Others came here once. They built these walls. They played alone. They bored me. Now they're gone. And instead, we have you. We are curious whether you swim with the current or fight against it, as they did.
After facing so many gigantic predators that have tried to eat you, it starts as a terrifying experience, but quickly learn the Emperor is capable of telepathy, has been reaching out to you at various points during the game, and views you, a small life form from a distant world, with respect and empathy. The Emperor is some 1600 years old, and no longer produces large quantities of enzyme 42, just enough that small fish called peepers traveling through the aquarium's pipe network are able to bring small quantities of it into the seas above, allowing life to survive despite the catastrophic extinction event that befell the planet. But not enough to cure yourself. At the bottom of the aquarium, though, lies the solution: the last 5 Sea Emperor eggs. Upon activating the incubator, the Emperor swims over to an alien arch and clears away the sand. When you power it up, it is revealed to be a portal to the surface world, and the Emperor then gives you the recipe for a special chemical that will signal the young Sea Emperors to hatch. The young soon break free and cuddle with their mother before swimming for the portal. After a millennia of watching over them, like an octopus, the Emperor collapses to the seafloor and begins to die, thanking you for saving their species.
My young are swimming for the shallows. I thank you. Their freedom is my end.
Following the young Sea Emperors through the portal, you find yourself near the weapon, while the young are producing concentrated balls of enzyme 42, which you use to cure yourself. Now you can deactivate the weapon, construct a rocket, and say goodbye to the planet and the ecosystem you have just saved.
Nearest interstellar phase gate. Engaging ion boosters in 3, 2, 1.
You jump away, with the Sea Emperor reaching out one last time to say a poem before dying.
What is a wave without the ocean? A beginning without an end. They are different, but they go together. Now you go among the stars, and I fall among the sand. We are different, but we go together.
Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, whereas sympathy is where you feel sorry or take pity on another. What Subnautica does that few other similar stories have is let you empathize with a dying species. Going back to the man trap, Captain Kirk and ultimately the audience can only sympathize with the plight of the salt vampire. But that is not the case with the Sea Emperor, and by extension, the rest of Planet 4546b. You are meant to empathize with this Leviathan of the deep. Both were snagged out of their lives by the actions of the same ancient alien race. Both are dying, and the only solution for both is to hatch the last Sea Emperor eggs, to let the Sea Emperor pass on their genes, and for the player to cure themselves of an alien infection. And ultimately they both leave the planet at the same time. They go together. The brilliance of Subnautica is using empathy, while also building the stakes carefully. Extinction permeates both the in-game dialogue and the lore, while the idea is subconsciously reinforced as you begin to overharvest resources, before making the solution to bring the planet's extinction event to an end and save yourself the same. One of the most common arguments used to convince people to protect biodiversity and conserve nature is the idea that we need it for our own survival, often using the analogy of a web, where a species going extinct is like pulling an individual strand out, and if enough are pulled, the entire structure falls apart. I am not usually the biggest proponent of this argument. Yes, if all the bees died, no more pollination, everybody dies. So yes, it is a valid reason for saving nature. But I think this argument has trouble saying why we should save something like the sage grouse, which I doubt if it went extinct would have any major impact on humanity at large. Often, to me at least, this argument often seems like saying, I don't know if it's important, but maybe it is? And so, to me at least, I think this argument may be a little too ambiguous to connect with. At its core, the plot of Subnautica is about saving nature to save yourself. But what Subnautica does is use empathy to build on top of this argument, which was a brilliant move. Giving the player several motivations for saving the life of Planet 4546b. First, for their own survival and return home, which is the goal of any survival game, but also because you connect with an endangered species, and perhaps forging an empathetic connection is the key for not only more compelling conservation narratives, but for protecting life on Earth. And employing empathy as a tactic to get people to care about wildlife is being used by many institutions, especially zoos, which are specifically starting to integrate empathy into visitor experiences to hopefully make it so that when they leave, zoo visitors are more empathetic and conservation-minded, which can push society as a whole in that direction. I plan to explore this idea and importance of zoos in our society outside of XC2 conservation later this year. The Sea Emperor is not the only creature in Subnautica that you are meant to empathize with. People often empathize with their pets, and I think you are meant to do so with the cuttlefish, a species that, like the Emperor, is down to its last few individuals, even if you hatch all 5 eggs hidden throughout the game. In many ways, the survivor of the Aurora is an allegory for the younger and future generations. Born into a world in the midst of an extinction crisis, with those responsible long gone, It is our responsibility to the future to restore ecological balance and function. Subnautica makes this choice as simple and easy as possible, where an XE2 conservation program and reintroduction of a mere 5 individuals brings a single keystone species back that will save the ecosystems of 4546b and let them persist into the future. But I do feel this simplification is pretty essential for streamlining the conservation message and making it more relatable. Subnautica, in my opinion, is one of the most brilliant pieces of wildlife conservation and environmental media. I never thought that I would see such a well-received, pretty mainstream video game be ultimately built around the ideas of conservation biology. What I think Subnautica does remarkably well is use empathy to make the environmental message feel more organically interwoven into the narrative, keeping it from seeming too forced. The conservation elements are also at the core of the plot, not some tacked-on message. The player's survival depends on saving the Sea Emperor species, and even if you don't connect with all of the planet's fauna all that much, you still end up saving them for your own good. This makes Subnautica a potential blueprint for crafting better conservation and environmental-centered stories. That said, video games have the unique quality of being interactive, which helps build that critical connection, which may make it easier to realize the survivor, for all intents and purposes, is us, the audience, a person in the middle of an ecological calamity, whose future will be determined by what they choose to do next. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it is a little different from my typical content, but I really enjoy watching breakdowns of media in video essay formats, and really thought I could add something to the discussion about Subnautica. I now want to hear your thoughts. Did Subnautica's narrative work for you? Did you notice any more environmental and conservation messages in the game? This is part of a Fundamentals of Conservation Biology series with a new episode coming out each and every month. So, your primary directive is to press the subscribe button. It's so beautiful. Give this video a like. Click the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. Subscribe. Share this video. Subscribe.